This happened about 5 years ago, when I was 26 years old. Back in those days, I used to go to this local pub restaurant by myself. I used to enjoy sitting in my favorite seat, and I just loved the menu. I didn't really care what others would think seeing me sat there alone. I was happy by myself. One day, I was at my usual table, drinking, and this guy comes up and starts talking to me. He looked to be about 45 years old at first glance. He was old enough to be my dad. He said that he saw me here often, and he was also here by himself. We got to talking, and it turned out that he was a really nice guy. He had similar hobbies to mine, and he came from a place really close to my hometown, and I was really surprised when he guessed my profession. When I asked how he was able to do that, he said, "I don't know, guess I'm psychic." This was a little strange because my profession isn't an obvious one. Now that I think back to it, it was more than a little strange that he guessed it. We hit it off straight away, and we would drink together. It was really great to have a new friend. Quite soon into our friendship, he asked me to show him my hometown. I was really confused by this. Why would a complete stranger want to see my hometown? It wasn't like he mentioned it once or twice in passing. He mentioned my hometown every time we met up. When I asked him why he wanted to go there so bad, he replied, "I just want to see what kind of place it is, and I want you to show me around." Since it had been about a year and a half since I had seen my family, I was giving visiting home some serious consideration. There was another reason why I was so eager to see my family. My sister had recently told me that she had been stalked by some guy. She had been asking me for some advice on how to deal with it. It was really traumatic since she was only a high school student. My sister was cute, but I never dreamed that she would have any troubles like this. I'll never forget it. She used the word persistent, which seemed so unnatural, and it just made me feel almost mournful for her. His method of stalking was online. He blanketed all of her socials. No matter how many times she blocked the guy, he made new profiles, and he always found a way to harass her. I won't go into the content of his harassment. I remember when I saw her in person. Her cheerful, lively smile had been reduced to an anxious, ponderous frown. She said that the stalker had backed off a little in the past few days. I was hoping the guy would quit entirely. He made my blood boil. But my blood soon went ice cold when I asked her if any of the stalker's profiles had a profile picture. She held up her smartphone and revealed the image of his stalker. I was looking at the guy I met in my favorite restaurant. There was no mistaking it. Just by the mole on his face, I knew it was him. I had to hide my shock. This guy had already traumatized her. I wouldn't let him hold any more power over her. Immediately, I asked myself internally, is this some sick coincidence? I live so far away from my sister. There is no way that he would know how to find me, surely not. I had to protect my sister. This ends now, I thought, as I lied to her and said, I haven't seen that guy, but look, his location. That's kind of near me, and I know that restaurant he's uploaded a photo of there. I'll keep an eye out for him, sis, and if I find him, he'll wish that I hadn't. She smiled softly, but I could tell that she didn't hold out much hope. I guess her look told me, thanks for the gesture. So I went back to where I was currently living, and I asked to meet up with my sister's stalker again. This time, I asked him to meet me somewhere a bit more secluded. We agreed to meet by a river in the area under the premise of watching a starry night sky. Romantic, right? The night of the date arrives, and I lie in wait with a plan. As soon as I see his car pull up to the spot, I walk over to him. He waves hello and ambles towards me, and I grab him by the neck. I wanted him to experience some fear. He is completely powerless. I guess he hasn't been in this position before. When I confront him, he breaks almost instantly. He tells me everything. He said that he saw my sister's pictures online, and he said he fell in love with her at first sight. Bear in mind, she's a high school student, and this guy is 45 years old. I guess you could say that it was stupid of me to confront him in a secluded location, but when you're in that situation, you just want to put things right. Thankfully, it worked, but it could have gone very, very wrong. I made him promise not to bother her again. He did. He was very obliging, since I had my hand around his throat. I was convinced that he would leave her alone. I called my sister. I didn't give any of the details away, but I told her I had resolved her little problem. She sounded relieved, and honestly, that was a massive weight off of my shoulders. After all this, the thing that scared me the most wasn't the stalker, but social media. How he was able to find me, and my sister, is nothing short of disturbing. Sadly, I haven't been to my favorite pub/restaurant since. Take care online, guys.
This happened when I was 24. It was a truly frightening experience. I'm a female, and back in those days I was working in an office. I was living alone in an apartment block. All I used to do was go to work, then come home. Life moved in a monotonous cycle. One day, as I was passing by the front of my local train station, a man called out to me. He was wearing a suit. He looked to be a real ladies' man. It broke up the routine of my mundane life. It was so refreshing to be hit on. Since I had nothing better to do that day, I decided to accept his invitation to go for a drink. But I reminded him that it would just be a drink and nothing more. He was a little older than me. I'd say about 3 years or so. We got on like a house on fire, so after a few dates, he offered me a relationship, and we became a couple. He was very witty and really fun to be around. It was about 2 months into our relationship, and it was the first time I invited him over to spend the night. I bought some alcohol and some snacks since it was a Friday, and I was eagerly awaiting his arrival. We set a time for him to come over, and that time had passed. He hadn't texted to say he was running late or anything. Strange. 1 hour passed, then another, and before long, it was night. I looked out the window into the night sky, wondering what had happened. An abrupt knocking sound came at the door. It was loud enough to make me jump. I wondered if this could be a courier or something. I remembered that I hadn't ordered anything there. Rarely people come to the door without being buzzed into the building. It was weird. I guessed it must be my extremely late boyfriend, so I headed to the door. "Can I come in?" It was his voice, but something told me not to open the door. How did he get to my door without being buzzed in? I can't really say why, but I really didn't want to open the door. "Can I come in?" He asked the same question, despite the fact that I didn't respond. "Can I come in? Can 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 I come in?" It was his voice, but it sounded like it was a recording of his voice, and it sounded like it was being played repeatedly. "Can I come in? Can I come in?" I hated it. I covered my ears. It was just so creepy. I couldn't tell you how long it went on for. All I can remember is when the voice finally stopped. I didn't know what to think. I was in a panic, so I called my boyfriend again and again, but he wouldn't pick up. He never returned any of my calls, and I never saw or heard from him again. I didn't know his address, and I couldn't contact him in any way. I didn't know where he worked or anything about his family. I realized that I barely knew a thing about the man, and that freaked me out a whole lot more. I often wonder about what happened to him and where he is today. Sometimes I wonder if he was even human. It feels like it was just a glitch in the Matrix sometimes. One thing is for certain, I'm really glad I listened to my gut and didn't let it into my apartment.
"13 or 14 years ago, I was working in Kansai. I had a part-time job there.
My job was to unload containers at the port. I had to unload these huge containers. We would store the unloaded cargo in our warehouses, and there we would keep them until whichever company came along to collect them. There was a lot of heavy machinery in use, cranes, forklifts, etc. A lot of the work depended on us staff manually unloading the containers. The containers were full to the brim, we're talking like 2 to 4 tons. Most of the stuff we would unload would be beverages, livestock food, things like that. In one day we could unload 2 or 3 of these containers. I remember once we were unloading box after box of laundry detergent in the height of summer. Man, it was hotter than hell, even hotter when you're in one of those giant metal things. The work was really hard, and my co-workers weren't exactly pleasant either. I worked with the Yakuza. They were ill-mannered and, shall we say, very quick to anger. I think I was working with some high-level Yakuza. Gang members, bosses. It was a real strange and shady company looking back on it. One day I was returning from my break as a container was being lowered. I heard the foreman chatting to the forklift driver. They looked like they were in serious discussion. Is it? Yeah, it's no good. I had just heard the tail end of their conversation. I didn't know what they were talking about. The container had to be unloaded this afternoon. It was untouched and full to the brim. Great. That's me not going home early, I thought. What the hell happened? What's the situation? And the 2 biggest mouth Yakuza looking guys were silent. I didn't ask, but I thought that was weird. After a little while, the boss told us that the unloading of that particular container had been cancelled for the afternoon. I found that strange to say the least, but I didn't complain. Apparently, during my break, they had opened the container. Another employee was there when the container was opened, and I got a chance to ask him about it. He said that when they opened the door, something moved in there, so they just shut the door, and someone suggested getting on the roof to look through one of the gaps to see what it was. They looked, and they saw all the usual cargo in there, but there was something else. Something's face. My colleague said it looked kind of like a human's face, but it was elongated. The eyes were huge and its mouth hung in a weird low point. It didn't move. It just watched. Thereafter, no one was permitted to go near that container. I asked him if maybe it could be an animal or something, and he replied, "Nah, not an animal. I've seen animals in there, and it's more common than you might think. I've even seen people climb out of those things." The containers are sealed with rivets when they leave whichever foreign port they come from. You need to use a large pincer-like tool to twist open the rivets on the doors of these containers. When we finish unloading them, I always go in to clean up, and I have found flowers and insects I have never seen before. How these things get on board I will never know, but maybe something happens somewhere along the distant seas. When I was leaving work, I heard something that will live with me for a long time. Some huge force slammed against the side of the container we were instructed not to open. It was ear-shattering. It slammed against the side twice. The whole warehouse stood still for a moment. I looked to the warehouse manager, and he looked terrified for his life. I think about this moment more often than I'd like to. The next day, the warehouse manager pretended like nothing happened. I handed in my notice. That was too much for me. I know what I heard, and I don't like the look of how my friend described the thing that was in there. What proves me right is the fact that that container was moved to another part of the warehouse and wasn't opened. It must be sealed to this day. I really hope it is.
My dumb friend invited me to go work with him at his part-time job. I was told it was going to be a ridiculously easy job. My friend, we'll call him N, I asked him about the gig, what kind of job it was. I didn't have a clue if I wanted to even do it or not. He told me that the job was just burning household goods. The strange thing was, we would burn these possessions, these things, in a remote part of the mountains. I jumped at the chance. I mean, if some guy offered to pay you just to burn some old junk, what would you do? There was an element of risk around the work though. It was a crime to have unauthorized fires out in the mountains, but the pay would more than make up for the risk. I was saving up for a motorbike at the time. I needed the money. I asked my friend what he did when he worked. He said that all he did was stand by the side of the road and check for passing cars. All he had to do was tell the guys burning the stuff when a car was approaching. The burners would temporarily try to cover the fire, to the best of their ability, hide, and then when the car passed, resume the burning. Sounded good to me. Shouting out when a car was approaching wasn't exactly backbreaking. The money made it worthwhile too. My friend N was a local. I wasn't. He seemed to know his way around though. We met at a factory, near the mountainous woods, at midnight. I was told that it was better to work at night. There was less chance of being spotted. On country roads, like the one we were close to, only the occasional truck drove by. The other workers seemed like troubled kids and wannabe gangsters. Not the sort used to physical labor, I guess you could say. It wasn't the most professional outfit. There was a guy a little older than us delinquents who appeared to be some sort of foreman. You know, someone in charge. He wore glasses, was a slim guy, and always seemed to have an eye on the operations. He looked like he was part of the Yakuza. So there N and I were, in the mountains at night, with nothing but Yakuza, delinquents, and the chirp of crickets for company. A truck arrived. It was full of household items. Desks, shelves, chairs, and Japanese-style dolls. It looked like all this stuff didn't come from just one house. The foreman walked over and offered half the payment of the night's work up front when he saw the truck arrive. My friend N was loving this. He knew the area well, and he knew how to run into the woods and escape if we had to. You know, if the cops came or something. As soon as I saw him grin, I knew we would both be fine. Some sheets of paper were handed out before we started to burn the stuff by the slender foreman in the glasses. He asked everyone to please read the list carefully. He handed out these sheets of paper. He even handed these sheets of paper out to the watchmen by the road. I can remember some of the items on the list. There were loads more there. Number 6, a black chest of drawers, 6 drawers. Number 7, a white uniform. Number 8, a 3-sided mirror with a mark on it. Number 9, a brown chest of drawers, 3 on top. I mean, this is just an example of the stuff we had to burn. "Remember the order, people, get to work," the foreman shouted. I didn't really understand. It was all gonna get burned, so what was the point of the order? I didn't really care. We were gonna get paid, so it didn't matter. I doused the first item in gas and lit it on fire. I chatted with the other guys who were hired. I guess we were all a bit bored. The foreman didn't seem that interested at first. He looked as if he had time to kill. He was playing around with his phone. Then he wandered over to me and Anne and struck up a conversation. He asked us things like, "What will you use the money for?" General chit-chat. Of course, I wasn't dumb enough to let too many personal details slip. I kept my answers as short as possible. Anne asked, "Hey, where did you get all this stuff?" Local shaman. You know, kind of priest," he replied. We now knew where all the stuff came from, but we didn't know what the big deal was about burning it, or the reason of the order on the list. After he told us this, he turned a bit cold, especially towards N, who asked him. We went back to work, and he wandered off. His attitude told us, no more questions. The flames grew higher and higher. The watchers by the side of the road grew wary and restless. They glanced our way while checking left and right. After a few minutes, one of the watchers shouted that a car was approaching. The guy with the glasses quickly asked if it was a police car. N said before we started the job that if it wasn't the police, the next worst thing would be a normal civilian car. Your run-of-the-mill family car. Truckers don't care if they see a fire. They have a job to do, and they can't stop to report stuff. But family cars were bad news, and one was approaching. We were told that the job would last until sunrise, but the passing car got the foreman a bit freaked out. He wanted us to speed the job up. There was still work to do, but the foreman told us to just hurry up and burn all the stuff before the cops turned up. We nervously looked at one another while the foreman paced around. His cell phone rang, and he answered. It was so quiet that night, I almost could hear the voice of the man he was speaking to. He started to apologize to whomever he was speaking to. He said that we were burning it all according to the instructions. He said that there were no problems and everything was going to plan. The job would be done tonight. He turned to us and said, "Keep burning, guys. We need this done tonight. We don't have much time." We were getting to the last few artifacts, 2 chests of drawers and a small doll. The foreman was getting annoyed with the order, and he repeatedly said that he didn't see the harm in lining them all up and just burning them all at once. "Just douse all of it and let's get going before we're all arrested." Change of plans, it seemed. It didn't bother us. We still got paid. Might as well earn the money, I thought. Just as I was dousing the last few items in gasoline, the foreman approached. He was on the phone, explaining to the other party how he hadn't changed the plan. He kept saying, "No, we haven't skipped anything. I promise we're doing it, as the list dictates, sir." He put his hand over the phone and shouted at me and N. "Just burn it all. Ignore the list. Don't worry." He went back to apologizing over and over again. The doll and the chests of drawers were ablaze. The doll burned. It made a horrible squeaking sound which pierced the silent mountain night. It looked as if it sat upright. My friend N is absolutely convinced that the doll reacted to the heat in a physical way, as if it could feel it, but I think it was simply the plastic reacting to the heat of the fire which made it look as if it moved. Either way, it was disturbing, especially in the dead of night, in the woods. We all stood there transfixed on the items burning. I couldn't take my eyes off of the doll. I saw its right arm raise up. Next was something unexplainable. The doll appeared to point towards the foreman, the guy who had been on the phone the whole time. He was so focused on his conversation, he didn't notice it. I started to freak out about the order and the rules around all this burning stuff. I began to believe that it had all meant something. The atmosphere was very sober. We did it right, though. I'm sure we did it right. I considered this as I watched the doll's fingers turn black and melt, all the while still pointing at the foreman. I glanced over to N and a couple of the other workers. They were all watching too. When everything had been sufficiently burned, we were handed a fire extinguisher each and were told to put the fire out. This was strange to me. It felt like the work was still half done. I didn't mind it that much though. Extinguishing the fire meant the conclusion of the job, and that wasn't bad at all. We burners and the watchers began to chat a bit. It felt like the night was almost over. It wasn't so stressful now. The foreman finished his call and walked back to us, all in a group, by the fire. No one said a word about the doll. I started to doubt what I had seen. Then we were handed the remaining cash that we were owed. This was a bit more like it. I couldn't wait to get back to civilization, and that was the end of the night, and that was the end of the job. A month or so went by, and I bumped into N. He walked over to me with a friend of his I hadn't met before. He said it was the guy who introduced him to that line of work. We spoke about that job. He then asked, "Hey, you remember the foreman-looking guy? The one with the glasses, who was on the phone the whole time?" Yeah, I remembered. Yeah, he died. They said that his death was a suspicious one. N continued to work these weird burn and lookout jobs. He said that one late night, the guy didn't turn up for work. He wouldn't answer the phone no matter how many times he was called either. People went to check on him. They said that something weird had happened in his apartment. There was a smell coming from there. They got the janitor to check on him. When they approached the door, they soon realized the source of the smell. The janitor opened the door with his master key. The stench was unbearable. The smell of fire, the stench of something burned, flooded their noses. Their faces told a story, as they knew they were too late. The man was burnt to a crisp in his bed. His body was charred and blackened. He didn't look as if he had moved at all, they said. He looked peaceful, as if he hadn't rolled around to extinguish the flames. The police concluded that he had died from smoking in the bed. I didn't know that he was a smoker. I didn't see him smoke once that night we worked together. It was disturbing to hear that someone I had known, if only briefly, was no longer walking the earth. The most disturbing part came next. N said that he didn't think the foreman died from smoking in the bed. He just turned to me and said, "This is why you don't mess around with the order the shaman gives you." He didn't follow the instructions on the list. Maybe it's all a coincidence, but it scared the hell out of me. This happened about 11 years ago. Back then, I had just broken up with my girlfriend. Let's call her Y. About a week after our breakup, I started to get these texts from an unknown number. Let me just sum up what the first message said. "I'm sorry to bother you. My name is T, and I work with Y. The truth is, I start to really like her. I know that you dated her, so I thought I'd come to you for some advice." My first reaction was, what the fuck? Who the hell does that? Why would this guy know my number and about my relationship with Y? The text gave off such a creepy vibe. It was actually longer than that. It stated in more depth his love for my ex. It ended with, "Please teach me how you got her to love you." Notice me, senpai. I thought of ignoring it, but I had a couple of beers on board, so I decided to reply. I found it funny in a way. I said something like, "I haven't been in touch with Y, but you know that it might not be the best timing. But if you like her that much, I guess it's up to you to let her know." Anyway, I got a reply about an hour later. "Thank you. Thank you very much for your reply and your support. It gave me courage. I'm glad, and I will do my best." As you might have guessed, I didn't reply to that. From then on, I got a text from this guy every single day. It was so cringy. "Thank you so much for your words of encouragement. They give me the strength and courage I need." Yep, I didn't reply to that, but this guy would text even if I didn't reply. "I summoned the strength to speak to her today. At work today, we had to place an order for stock. It was so great." Another one came through. "She bumped into me on the way to work. Ah, it was so great, my friend. We talked about stuff besides work." I don't give a shit about him, and he sounded like a major creep, so again, I didn't reply. But it was kind of interesting for a while to get the daily report of a weird dude's life. It was around this point the content of his texts changed. "Why doesn't Y know how I feel? Why isn't she noticing my advances? She must have loads of boyfriends, male friends, whatever. Why does everyone laugh at me when I speak to her? I see people trying to hide their smiles. I really hate girls with lots of guy friends." Shit, I thought. What have I gotten me and Y into? I should have told him to fuck off ages ago. Before I could think of what to do, he sent another text. "I have just thought up a great plan, my friend. I'm gonna get some friends to attack her after her night shift tonight, and I'll jump in to save her. I'm sure that'll win her over." The way me and Y ended things was bad, don't get me wrong, but I wasn't about to let her get jumped by some weirdo and his friends, so I had to let her know. I sent her a text. I explained everything in the text about her co-workers' plans for her after her night shift. I even offered to pick her up and take her home. Her reply was unexpected, to say the least. "The guy you're speaking of doesn't work here. The only male co-worker I have is the owner of the store. It's true that I'm working tonight, but only till 11 p.m. And then I'll be leaving with my friends. There's police about, so don't worry about me." It was actually quite a relieving message, if not a bit cold. I was glad she was safe, but T, the guy who was emailing me, genuinely was making my skin crawl. I mean, he didn't even work with her. I sent him a text. "Look, creep, I told Y about your little plan. Don't lay a finger on her, got it?" T didn't reply. When it started to get dark outside, I started to get twitchy. I was thinking of my ex, working the night shift, and I was also thinking of that weird guy. I was checking my phone to see if he replied, but he hadn't. Rain started to fall. It passed 11 p.m., his proposed time to attack, and my phone was still silent. Nothing from my ex either. I began to relax a little. My ex was calling. I answered it. She was crying and in a panic. "I'm on my way home and I'm by the station. What do I do? What do I do? A guy's been following me the whole way." Whoa, what's going on? I was in a panic too. "I'm too scared to look behind me." Then the line abruptly cut. My doorbell rang. My heart was racing. I went to the peephole and saw my ex at the door. I quickly opened the door and let her in. She lives on her own, like I do. So I guess that's why she came to mine. She was as white as a ghost and was crying, covered in rainwater too. I locked the door immediately. "Did the person following you see you go into my apartment?" I asked. "I don't know, I guess so. He was really close as I got to your door. I guess, yeah, probably," wife said. I ran out to my balcony. I looked, but there was no sign of anyone out there. I grabbed my phone and called T's number. "I'm calling the police. I have all the proof I need to show them if you try anything stupid tonight." I couldn't hear a word. Just the sound of rain crashing down in the background and his breathing. Then the line cut. I knew he was out there somewhere. I know. I should have contacted the police sooner, but when you're young, it's sometimes the last thing you want to do. Also, I was a real dick when I was young. Maybe I was scared of getting in trouble. We sat and chatted all night. I convinced her not to go to work the next day and to be ready to go to the police if anything happened. We shot nervous glances at the door all night while the rain lashed the windows. I was expecting to hear the doorbell at any moment, but thankfully we went the whole night without incident. The next day I got a huge text from T. It went something like this. "I'm truly sorry. My name isn't T. I don't work with your ex. I went to her shop and I fell in love with her at first sight. A couple of days later, I was in a local restaurant and I saw her there. I overheard her talking about the recent breakup with you. She seemed like she wasn't fazed by the breakup. Well, at least her friends were making it seem that way. They mentioned your name. They were getting drunk too, and they all went to the toilet together. And that's when I saw my opportunity. She left her phone on the table, you see, and that's where I found your number. I'm sorry for what I did." After this weird confession, nothing further happened, and I didn't hear from T again. I didn't know the guy's true identity, or what he looked like, so I couldn't do anything about him. I couldn't report him, I couldn't warn anybody about him. All I could do was give the number to the police. And I did, but nothing came of it. This didn't impact me as much as Y, but so far, this is the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me. So T, on behalf of myself and Y, let's not meet. This happened about 2 years back. It all started when I went on a solo mountain climbing trip in Tohoku. I started my climb at roughly 8 a.m. I made it to the summit of the mountain by 12. It only took about half the time I went up to get back down, so I was left with some free time on my hands. I decided to take in the scenery. I headed down a road around the cliff face. It was a refreshing change from the mountain trail I had spent the morning on. I had read online that a lot of people pick their own vegetables from this area, so I thought I'd give that a shot, take a wee keepsake back home with me. So I was foraging around deep into the cliff face forest, getting some good stuff and enjoying the scenery. I found plenty of wild mushrooms and a lot of interesting plants. Then, up ahead, I saw a dark black shadow about 30 meters away. I got closer and realized it was the entrance to a cave. I was curious, so I stumbled through the bushes towards it. On closer inspection, it was incredibly dark, but plenty wide for entering. I had my mountain hiking headlamp with me. and I'd been caving a couple of times, so I thought, why not? It was pretty cool discovering a cave. Here in Japan, if you discover one, you get to name it, and if a new large cave was discovered, it would be national news. So with those thoughts on my mind, I went in. I didn't want to tell anyone about it since I didn't want anyone to claim it for their own. I really felt as if this was an undiscovered cave, and I had to check it myself. The cave floor was rough and ragged and littered with puddles. It was big and surprisingly wide. It opened out into different areas. It was big enough to stand up in too. So I wouldn't get lost, I dropped some of my vegetables as makeshift markers, Hansel and Gretel style, in the hope that I would easily be able to find my way back to the entrance. After about 20 minutes of walking around in there, I met a dead end. Well, not a dead end actually. There was a hole, 2 meters wide, enough to squeeze my body through. I was sure I could get through there, easily, and continue exploring the cave. However, I didn't have the courage to enter the hole. Fears of claustrophobia and the idea of being trapped, alone in the dark, were insurmountable. Instead, I shone my torch inside. I saw that after about a meter or so, it opened up again. I could see stalagmites on the cave floor. I panned along the ground with my headlight and saw something humanoid in shape. I'll never forget the moment my eyes landed on it. It looked like a mound of hardened mud at first, but it wasn't. It was humanoid. It had long limbs, dark, hardened mud-like skin, and tiny eyes. The eyes, they looked useless. It was thin, and it looked as if it was bigger than a human. It was only partially visible, but the second I saw it, I let out an involuntary scream. It was just lying there motionless between the stalagmites. I turned my head away almost instantly, and, as if in response, I heard something groan from that chamber. It didn't sound normal. It was some inhuman grunt. Things weren't normal in the cave and I had to get out. I needed to get out. I ran for it. Some innate instinct told me to flee, and as I did, I barely kept myself stable. I weaved in and out of puddles and around rocks. I heard the flutter of bats behind me as I ran. Beneath the flapping of wings was the definite, inhuman groan I had heard moments ago. Except this time, I heard footfall. It sounded like someone, or something, was running. I tripped and skinned my knees. I got to my feet as soon as I could, and I just kept running. I saw the light of the exit of the cave up ahead as the bats flew past me overhead. The sun was setting when I got out. I kept running towards the ridge, and then I climbed down. It was 7:30 when I arrived at the parking lot below. Thankfully, there were some people around. I asked them for help. My leg was in agony from my trip in the cave, and my knees were covered in blood. An older gentleman drove me to the nearest hospital, and I was immensely grateful. The wounds on my legs were deeper than I realized. The man who drove me to the hospital stayed with me until midnight and invited me to join his caving club meeting. So I did. I told them about what I had seen in the cave, and they theorized the following. The growling sound I heard was probably made by the echo of the bat wings. They told me that seeing humanoid-shaped masses in caves is entirely normal. It's a conditioned response to the darkness for all humans to find shapes which the mind can easily recognize. Caves discovered on the mountain will be named after the person who discovered it. They were all interested in checking out the cave, and so was I, since I might be attaching my name to it. A few days later, and I was invited to go back to the cave with the group to check it out. My injuries hadn't healed, so I declined. I heard from the group that they went in search of the cave, but they were unable to locate it. After several failed expeditions, they called me again to double-check the location, and eventually they persuaded me to come back to show them the way to the cave myself. I couldn't believe that they couldn't find it, and I started to wonder if I had hallucinated the whole thing. I quickly understood when I got there the reason why this bunch of caving enthusiasts couldn't find the cave. It turned out they weren't the best map readers. The thicket outside was more overgrown now. It gave me the chills to be back there. I could see that thing in my mind's eye. We all stood in front of it. There were about 10 of the caving club members in attendance. I still believed that I saw something humanoid on the cave floor. There was an atmosphere outside the cave which was unexplainable. The leader of the caving club said, "Come on. You'll look in the chamber, and it'll be nothing but a disappointment. Trust me, we're going to light the place up for you too," he said as he tapped his torch. Everyone was armed with a torch, and it made me a bit less anxious to go in. Plus, I'd realized I'd look pretty dumb if I didn't go in. I mean, what was I going to do? Just sit outside waiting for them? Once inside, thanks to the torches, the whole cave was completely illuminated. It didn't seem as daunting anymore. I could see more of the cave now. I was surprised to see less rocks and debris on the ground, and equally surprised to learn that the cave ascended and descended in areas. All 10 of us went in, and sadly, I couldn't see any trace of the humanoid creature I'd seen. It took us about 30 minutes to scour the entire cave and reach the point where I saw it. One of the caving club guys wasted no time and attempted to climb through. He said that there was about a 4-meter drop on the other side of the opening, so it was just as well that something scared me off. If I might have been braver, I might have fallen and been trapped in the darkness alone. One thing I noticed was that the stalagmites had been broken, as if some path had been created. I must have looked totally mad to the caving club members. And the truth is, I felt a bit foolish. It all seemed so real though. They seemed happy enough. They wanted to come back with climbing gear and explore the place. I didn't want to be a part of that though. I mentioned that my Hansel and Gretel wild vegetable trail was nowhere to be seen, but I guess some animal could have got them. A few weeks pass and someone from the caving club calls. They investigated the other chamber. They said that they found a pile of strange things in there. Climbing gear, watches, bones, cloves, and a pile of vegetables which had begun to rot. Something was in there. Probably still is. I don't ever want to go back. I want to share a true story, which happened to me when I was much younger than I am now. By the way, I'm a pretty old man, but I can't forget this. I lived in a seaside town when I was a kid. It was amazing. I lived opposite the beach. I used to earn pocket money as a kid by diving for clams, abalone, and crabs. Abalone brought the most money in. If I caught 3 or 4, I could get a ton of cash. Well, it felt like a ton when I was younger. Abalone are a kind of marine snail. I remember that day. I got up early and I headed to the cape. There was a small cove there. In this area the waves weren't so harsh, and beneath the waves, the seaweed grew densely. Abalone can't resist seaweed, so I was sure I would get a great haul. The seaweed and kelp were so dense, I had to dive in way out and circle back round underwater. Push past all the seaweed to find the abalone. I usually would get lucky and find them when I turned over rocks on the seabed. The thing was, I wasn't finding the abalone, but I was finding other mollusks and shellfish. I didn't want to come all the way to the cove and end up going home empty-handed. It was incredibly tiring, diving down and foraging around on the ocean floor, but I was determined to find some abalone. I decided to begin a search further into the kelp and the seaweed. The seaweed was especially thick in one area, and I thought I would have a higher chance of finding them there. Kelp and seaweed can be dangerous, I have heard cases of people being entangled in it. I didn't know this back then. I was turning over stones on the ocean floor amidst the green seaweed. I remember this part very clearly. I had turned over 2 stones, and I needed to go back up to the surface for air. I froze. I was rendered completely motionless, unable to move, as just below the surface of the sea level, looming over me as I looked up towards the light filtering down through the ebbing waves, was a body. Submerged beneath a blanket of seaweed, the body cast its shadow over me. It was floating only a meter above me. I remember it, as clear as a bell. I remember the body looked so pale in comparison to the browny green seaweed. From the waist up, she was naked. Her hair swayed. Her eyes were open and peering down at me. For a second, it looked like her fingers were moving, but I knew this couldn't be possible. Yet it looked as if she was beckoning to me. I screamed, letting out a stream of bubbles. Seawater filled my mouth, and I remember swallowing a load as I desperately swam to the surface. I cut my arms and legs on rocks and barnacles on my way. I didn't care though. I had to get away. I was flapping, screaming, and choking as I broke the surface. A nearby fisherman ran over to me. I told him what I had seen, and I guess he didn't believe me at first. I mean, who would have? He dove in the water to see for himself. I saw him emerge with a pale look on his face, and I watched him race off in his bathing suit to a house nearby. He called the police, I guess. I didn't know what to do. I didn't hang around for the police. I didn't want to be in trouble. I don't know why I thought I would be, but in my head I assumed that they would think I had something to do with that poor girl's death. I watched from up on the cliff. I guess I wanted to at least see her come out of the water. I couldn't tell you why though. 3 hours passed before I saw a diver arrive and emerge with the body. Strange to have such a summer memory as a youngster, but this is one of mine. Rumor had it that the body belonged to a university student who got swept up in an adulterous affair with her tutor. Scared of his home life coming to an end, he decided to end something else to save it. Her life. I never found out if there was any truth in those rumors. It's been over 30 years now, but sometimes in my dreams, I see that young woman's face emerging amidst the seaweed, her floating above me, as if she was in the room with me. God rest her soul. This happened when I was at university. A bunch of pals and I decided to go to the beach. There were 3 of us, 3 guys. We didn't really have a plan, we were just tooling around and driving about, and only hours earlier, we decided to go to the ocean on a whim. We wanted to go to an empty beach and go diving and mess around, without annoying any families nearby. We were driving along, arguing about which beach would be the best and have the least amount of people on it. After a while, we decided on a gravel beach. There were only a few windsurfers off at sea. It was a part of the coast which none of us had ever been to before. We were impressed that we found somewhere off the beaten track. Before we went in the sea, we all blew up the inflatables. It was going to be a great time, we all thought. I'm going to be brutally honest, one of my friends absolutely sucks at swimming, so he wore an inflatable life jacket. We all ripped on him, but nothing too harsh. He didn't care either. The sun was out and the water was warm. It was a perfect day for swimming. What made it even better was the fact that there was no one around. One of my pals wanted to go to the bathroom. "Dude, we're in the sea," I said, and he just looked at me. "Oh, I got you, not that kind of... Okay, alright, yeah." We had spotted a bathroom in the car park. I was kind of tired of swimming around, so I followed him back to the beach. Our other friend was enjoying himself, swimming, so he stayed out at sea in his life jacket. I lay on a towel on the beach and closed my eyes. I guess about 10 minutes passed, and that's when I heard somebody shouting, "Hey!" I looked out at the sea, and it looked as if it was our friend with the swimming issues. "Hey!" he shouted again. I shouted back, asking him what was wrong. He just shouted, "Hey!" again. I shouted at him to come and join us on the beach, but I guess he couldn't hear us because he didn't really react. So I hopped back in the sea and paddled towards him. "What are you doing? You can't swim!" I shouted. Each time he just shouted, "Hey!" back at me. What the f*** is wrong with you? I wondered. And that's when it dawned on me. It wasn't him. It was a guy, and he was roughly the same size as our friend, but it was not him. The dead giveaway was that this guy didn't have a flotation jacket on. The sun obscured my view of this guy, treading water in the ocean in front of me. My first thoughts weren't, "Who the hell is he?" but more, "Where the hell's my friend?" The guy who was yelling, "Hey!" had gone silent. He stared at me with a blank expression. My friend was nowhere to be seen, so I turned to swim off in another direction to search for him. The guy with the blank expression was freaking me out, and I was panicking because I couldn't find my friend. I couldn't fight the tide. It felt like I was literally being pulled closer and closer to this weird guy. And then I literally was being pulled. Something cold clamped around my ankle as I kicked my legs in the water. It was so strong that I skittered off of the inflatable and under the water. I saw the bubbles from my scream rise towards the surface as I went deeper below. Water filled my lungs. It was terrifying. Then I was being hoisted to the surface. A surfer who had happened by saw the whole thing and intervened at the right moment. A few moments later, and who knows, I might have been a goner. The surfer helped me back to the beach. I was spluttering the whole way. My two friends at the beach rushed over. They thanked the surfer again and again. They kept asking me what had happened, but I was so out of breath. The surfer answered for me. "I'm not coming back here again, guys. There's something in the water. Something that dragged your pal under. It didn't look human either. I only saw it for a second, but nah, I'm out. Grabbed your pal. Just pulled him right under. Nearly lost him. I nearly lost him. I've never seen anything like that. Bye, guys." There was a hand-shaped bruise around my ankle. We got the hell off of that beach. My friend, who we left at sea, said he had just paddled back about 5 minutes after we headed back, but he just went back to a different point on the beach. We went to a convenience store and spoke to a clerk there. We told him about the beach and what happened at sea. He knew the beach we spoke of. He said it was off limits to the general public. I guess we didn't see the signs. The reason why swimming is prohibited there is because of the frequent riptides. Apparently these riptides account for a fair few deaths each year, and potentially more missing people cases. Well, that's what they say. I think back to the moment when I heard something calling me out to sea, and then something pulling me under, and it just makes me think that something else, other than riptides, is at work. My family used to live in the countryside. When I was at school, and school would be out for the summer, I would often be in the house alone during the daytime. Usually I would sit up in my room reading books, waiting for my mum to come home from her part-time job. She would usually be back around evening time. One day I was doing my usual routine of reading upstairs when I heard a noise coming from downstairs. It sounded like it came from the front door. I have always had a really good sense of hearing, so I was able to hear someone quietly open and close the front door.
Now, I wasn't worried at this point because I thought that it was just my mum coming home early. The house was silent. My mum always used to call upstairs when she got home. I started to think that it wasn't my mum down there, and I began to worry. My whole body went stiff. I couldn't move a muscle. I just kept thinking, what if it wasn't Mum down there? There wasn't time to panic though. I forced myself to my feet. I opened my bedroom window quietly, so if something was about to happen, then at least I would have an escape route. Then I crept over to the bedroom door, which was already open, and I looked out of it towards the top of the stairs. I heard some shuffling kind of sounds. I remember thinking that it could have been a big cockroach flying around down there. In my young age, I couldn't fathom the idea that anyone besides the people who lived in this house would have the gall just to walk in. I had no concept of home invasions or burglars at that age. I decided to go downstairs to try and find the source of the noise. I thought that the sounds were coming from the kitchen, but there was no one there. I thought that it must have been just my imagination, so I turned to go back upstairs. And that's when I heard a creak. The door beneath the kitchen sink slowly swung open. I was sweating, but I wasn't sure if it was through fear or because this happened in the height of summer. I stooped to look inside the cupboard. I saw a pair of legs in there and a hand gripping the sewage pipe. I didn't know what to do. I nearly collapsed. I uttered a small whimpering sound, then quickly walked away. I was so panicked, I couldn't understand what I'd just seen. I got into a sliding wardrobe. I guess that's what you do when you're a child. When there's trouble, or you're scared, you hide, right? I just sat in the wardrobe, with my knees pulled up to my chest, shivering. I guess I stayed like that for about an hour. During that time I heard no other sounds. The house was silent, but I stayed in the wardrobe. It was so hot. I was worried that there was a ghost in our house. I couldn't even open my eyes. I couldn't really process what I had seen in the kitchen. I just waited for Mum to come home. I managed to convince myself that there was something on the other side of the wardrobe I was hiding in. I then realized whatever was out there could get my mum when she walked through the door. I couldn't have that. I couldn't let my mum be in danger. I don't know why I suddenly felt so courageous, but I did. I left the safety of the wardrobe. Thinking back on it, it was mad that I did that. Absolutely mad. I didn't see anyone in the house though. Some drawers and cupboards were open, but other than that there was nothing else out of place. I even checked under the sink, and the owner of those legs and that hand that I had seen earlier had seemingly disappeared. Satisfied that the house was now empty, I headed back upstairs to continue reading. I pushed my door open and then stopped dead in my tracks. My bed looked different. It looked as if there was something in the bed, beneath the covers. I then saw a foot slide slowly out from the covers. It was real now. There was someone here with me. Through teary eyes, I tried my best to step backwards and out of the room without making a sound. But I had been spotted. I saw an eye staring at me from the gap in the covers. The covers then slid down to reveal a man's face. There was an adult man in my bed, in my room. A man I hadn't ever seen before. I screamed and I just ran for the stairs. I heard the covers being thrown to the floor, and the sounds of thunderous adult footsteps giving chase. I ran outside and shut the door. I ran into a bald guy passing by on the street and he helped me. He called the police for me,
I was just an 8-year-old girl, and it was all too much. The bald man restrained the intruder, and he didn't let him get away. The police came very quickly and arrested him. It turns out that the intruder was a delivery person. I had accepted a parcel from him once. He must have known that I would be home alone, or he must have thought that no one was home. He might even have asked me if anyone was home, and I might have told him that I was always alone in the daytime. I can't remember. I just hope I wasn't that dumb, though. I asked my mum about this event again recently, and she said that all we got was a call from the delivery company's head office, issuing an apology. They then considered the matter closed. It was incredibly traumatizing for me. The neighbors said that they had seen him eyeing up our house. Even though I have no idea what he was planning to do, I think myself very lucky to still be around. If you consider the possibilities in your own head now, you might think me lucky too. My mum quit her job soon after this, and I wasn't left alone until I was older. We ended up moving houses too.
A few years back, I was working part-time night shifts in a convenience store. I want to tell you about the scariest thing that happened to me while I was working there. I have since quit working there because of this incident. It was too creepy. I was working deep in the countryside, way out in the sticks. We didn't really get many customers. At night, literally no one came in, so I used that time as my own. I was alone, eating snacks and reading, etc. An elderly customer would come in every night. Since I had so few customers at night, I noticed this. I think anyone who has worked the night shift before would know what I mean. He would always walk in the store about 3 a.m. with his stick in hand. Every night he bought the same thing, milk and bread. We developed a bit of rapport. We would chat for a little while at the register. I think he appreciated this and understood it as perhaps some sense of intimacy. I enjoyed talking with him. It kept me from going crazy, alone there at night. He was just a friendly and polite older gentleman who wanted to chat to someone. That's what threw me. Then the weird stuff began to happen. I would see him even on my days off. That's not that weird, I can hear you thinking, but he would intentionally bump into me without physical contact. He would always say, "I'll work on this house," and he would start chatting to me as we did on the night shift. He would talk out these chance meetings. He kept saying things like, "Fate has drawn us together," which of course really creeped me out, so I started to get a little concerned. Then later, when I would be working the night shift, he would come in with his cane to get his bread and his milk, and he would ask, "Where were you going when I saw you today?" I mean, he asked nicely, but it was creepy. Why would he care where I was going? I wasn't stupid enough to tell him about what I get up to outside of work, so I would always say, "Well, I just run an errand." He would then say, "Well, I'm glad I got to see you outside of work." Even if I turned my face around, he would try to meet my eyes with his. It was starting to feel beyond uncomfortable. I started to feel irritation rising whenever I would hear his cane as he approached the convenience store. I decided to change my approach to him. I dropped all the furniture and served him in a minimalistic way that I did to avoid regular customers. I felt bad about the way I had treated him, since he didn't seem to understand he had done anything wrong. I just didn't know any other way to make him stop being creepy. For about 2 or 3 weeks, the store was quiet and peaceful without his presence. Then something I don't like to think about happened. I was on my night off, sat on my bed, reading a book as I often do. I heard something I couldn't quite put my finger on to begin with. I was sure I heard this sound before. Like a tapping from outside my door. I looked down at the time. It was about 3 a.m. Then it dawned on me. It was the sound of the old man's cane. In that moment of realization, my skin went ice cold. The tapping continued up the hallway until it reached my door. ceased. I was petrified. I couldn't move. I was gripping the bed sheets and my knuckles were turning white. I wanted to go over to the peephole to check, but I just couldn't. After a few moments, I heard the cane begin to tap me, moving further down the hall. It was open. That's what I thought, but I was wrong. It happened a few more times. I finally called the police, and they said since he hadn't done anything, we couldn't arrest him. It's not illegal to walk that hallway like this. I can't tell you how frightening that situation was. I still had to go to work every night. And every night around 3 a.m., I would be terrified that I would hear his cane tapping into the store, but he never showed up at work. Just to my apartment door. I don't know how he was able to find my apartment. I guess he must have followed me out. I've quit that job, and I've since moved away.
This happened when I was in university. There was a place relatively close to our dorm where people would come to end it all. It was a waterfall deep in the mountainous woods. Hereinafter, I will refer to it as the Falls. Even though the Falls was known for that unfortunate reason, it was still a beautiful area. Parents and children would often come on forest walks, and perhaps the dark secrets of the Falls weren't known to them, nor should they be. It was a great place to beat the heat in summer. The scene is set, right? Picture me on a hot and humid summer night in my dorm with some friends, gathered around. We got to talking about ghost stories, you know, the classics, urban legends, etc. A friend had a friend who was a so-called medium, and he was in my dorm. So this medium starts telling us his personal ghost stories, right? And we're all listening intently for a bit. And then his stories begin to sound like ones I'd heard before. Then, one of my male friends pipes up and says, "I'm bored of listening to stories. Let's go experience something for real. I dare you all to go to the Falls." Before I knew it, plans were being created and we were all heading out of the door, without a care for what might be lying in wait. None of us were interested in backing down since the first person who said yes was the most attractive woman in the room. Sorry, my friends are Neanderthals. I wasn't scared, I was more worried that we were all drunk and about to head into the forest. I didn't want anyone to get hurt. Luckily our phones had flashlights. We divided up into a couple of groups, me and 2 other friends. The guy who dared us and the pretty girl. The object of the dare was to reach the top of the falls and bring something back. We hadn't thought about what that thing was since we were all drunk. The falls were about a 30-minute walk away. Luckily, one of the guys in the other group managed to flag down a taxi, and we all got a ride there. The taxi driver dropped us off with a smirk, and we stood there in front of the towering trees. "Whoa, it's dark," I heard someone mutter. He was right. There was no streetlights or moonlight. I laughed as we began walking into the darkness with our phones in hand, illuminating the way. Well, it was my first time to head up to the falls at night, and to be perfectly honest, I wasn't as scared as I thought I should be. The road was well paved. I thought to myself, this is too easy. I heard the sound of water. I knew we were getting closer to the falls. A cool breeze flowed by, mixed in with the humidity of summer. I could now sense some tension in the group. There were rows and rows of these small stone statues. They're called Jesus here. Our smartphones' torchlights fell on the statues, and it really spooked some of them in the group. I mean, in the daytime they would never frighten you. Just because it's dark, it doesn't make something frightening, right? I kept walking when my friend grabbed me by the hem of my shirt. It startled me. I turned to face him, and he had his index finger drawn against his lips to indicate the shh sign. I shrugged as I was drunk, and then he whispered, "I can hear something." Me and the other girl looked around, straining our ears to try and find out what had got this guy so worried. What was it? What was he trying to scare us? Why would he do that to us girls in the forest? I studied his face, lit by our smartphone's lights, and he wasn't playing around. Something had this guy frightened. I then heard something. I tilted my head up in the direction of the sound, and saw my friends do the same. I thought that the only sound I could hear was the sound of the cascading waterfall, but I was wrong. When I listened more closely, I heard something else mixed in with the sound of the falls. Was that someone chanting? I looked at my friends' faces. I knew by a wordless glance that they had heard what I had heard. It wasn't someone chanting, it was people chanting. There were voices overlapping one another, out here in the dead of night. My spine turned to ice. I can't speak for the others, but by judging their partially lit faces, I imagine they were feeling something similar. The guy started murmuring, his voice as whispery and raspy as a mosquito. "I've heard stories about this place," he began. "There's a religious group near here. Maybe it's them. I heard that they have a ritual where people have to sit under the falls. I heard that the ones who go under for too long become missing people." I looked at my female friend, and she looked pale. I can't blame her. That chanting noise in the dark was deeply disturbing. I asked her if she was alright, and she said that she felt sick and she wanted to turn back. I took one glance at the guy, and knew he didn't need any persuasion to cut our night short. With a silent nod, we were heading back the way we came. We started walking back. My friend, walking ahead, turned back to face me, took one look, screamed, and she ran down the path. Her scream caused me and the guy to panic, so we bolted after her. I cannot tell you how frightening it is to be running in the woods, not knowing the reason for why you are running, but knowing it was enough to make your friend scream and run for their life. Well, we finally caught up to her. She was beneath a streetlight, shivering. When we got our breath back, we asked her why she ran away, and I will never forget these words. "When I turned around, I saw about 20 people, dressed in white, surrounding us between the trees." I asked her if she was serious, and the look in her eyes told me that she was. I stood there at the edge of the woods, looking in, wondering what was going on there in the falls. I heard chanting voices rise, and I knew that we had to leave immediately. I won't go there again, not even in the daytime. This happened last summer, and it still sends shivers up my spine when I think back to it. I was traveling for business. I had to take something to one of our laboratories. It had to be there that night to be used in the morning, so I was gunning it along the express highway. I was passing by Mount Fuji and about to enter a toll road. I didn't want to do this as I didn't want to pay. Plus, I thought that if I took a detour, I might be able to shave a few minutes off the estimated arrival time. Boy, was I wrong. I turned down a road close to Aokigahara. You know that famous forest, right? I slowed down a little on this road as I was approaching a fog bank. It was plain sailing for a while until my lights abruptly cut out. I pulled into the hard shoulder and hit my hazards. I was really frustrated. I guessed that a fuse had blown or something. I popped the hood and started playing around, trying desperately to fix it, but when I realized I was probably causing more harm than good, I slammed the hood shut. I considered driving without the lights, even if it wasn't a foggy night, which it was. It was an idiotic idea. I slumped in the driver's seat at a loss. I didn't know what I could do next. Suddenly I was struck with tinnitus. You know that terrible ringing in your ears? It was awful. It made me feel sick. I had never had it this bad before. I looked up and noticed something in my rearview mirror. There was a shadowy figure stood behind my car. The moment I laid eyes on that shadow, I heard something. The roar of some kind of animal. This happened at around 2:30 in the morning, so there is no good reason why anyone would be out here on the mountain roads that late, and what I saw in the mirror was definitely humanoid. I was surrounded by thick, dense forest, for as far as the eye could see. There wasn't a single car on the road either. I had never felt so alone. I heard the sound of footsteps running around my car. They were audible even though my engine was on. I could feel something coming for me. I felt surrounded and trapped. Those awful footsteps grew louder and louder, and I had to get out of there. I was thinking about opening my door and running for it. I could imagine not getting far. Then I'd be a missing person. They'd find my car out here, and I'd become an unsolved mystery. Just as I was thinking about seeing my parents being interviewed on TV, I heard something strike the rear window of the car. It wasn't a rock or anything. It sounded sticky, like something fleshy had landed there. I did not want to see what was back there, so I dragged my rearview mirror out of position and hit the gas. I was driving straight into the fog with no lights. Just as I was about to enter a tunnel up ahead, the lights suddenly came back on. I was so relieved. I reached the next toll booth up ahead And I swear to God, that was the only time in my life I was happy to see one of those things. The lights of the toll booth were so comforting after that experience. I felt safe. After a little while longer, I pulled into a convenience store to get a coffee and check over my car. My car was covered in morning dew since I had been driving through that fog. The windows were wet. I went to the rear of my car and stopped in my tracks. There were so many handprints of varying sizes on the glass. Since that incident, I have never tried to avoid toll roads to find shortcuts. I have no explanation for the handprints or what made that horrible roaring sound. But I don't like it. I don't like to think about the number of people who go missing around here either.